Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, I can say we have the possibility to realize our virtual event, Next Pharma Summit, or as we call it these days, Next Innovation Week, because for a whole week from Monday, so from today till Friday, we will have very interesting sessions and only 2 sessions per day. This is, as you all know, the first session. And actually the opening one, quite popular, really a lot of people registered, and I really hope you will enjoy for the whole week of these pharma innovation talks. Maybe some very interesting symbolic to mention at the very beginning. Maybe you notice I'm wearing a t-shirt where you can see David Bowie, one of the greatest artists ever. And why I choose that is actually because he reinvented himself for a couple of times, actually dozens of times, right? Same as we did with our conference, so we didn't just replicate a live event into a virtual one. We really wanted to create something completely different, whole week of innovation, free submissions, and pretty amazing speakers. So the first session, as we all know, is having the title, Your Digital IQ with Multi-Channel Content Revolution. My great pleasure to welcome here today Davidek Herron. Hi Davidek, how are you?
How are you doing today? Thanks for having me, Dario.
Thank you, Davidek. We have Malik from Novartis. Hi, Malik. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. And Morten, the global multi-channel head from Novo Nordisk. Morten, how are you?
Hi, Dario. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. And Mark from Viihealth, who is actually having some audio problems, but I'm pretty sure he will join us very soon. So let's start with some interesting facts. So in total, we have more than 1,500 registrants. It's even closer to 2,000 actually. More than 40 different speakers, 5 days, as said, and actually 10 different and very interesting sessions for the whole week. We all know that this session is in particular one of the most popular one because definitely pharma finally started this whole digital transformation procedure and process. And we all know that unfortunately it was triggered because of COVID. Quite complex theme, and I believe we are all quite bored already with this kind of word, right? And since we all moved to this whole digital sphere, I think that in many cases we can't see the forest for the trees, because these days everyone is doing everything across digital. We are using different channels, and the whole ecosystem is definitely very disrupted. And of course, because of that, the competition is very tough, because we can, I think, describe the whole pharma ecosystem these days with this particular slide. So everything is in the cloud, everything is in a digital way. And I hear many times that people are saying that we are using game-changing technology. And in my personal opinion, if you encounter this and if you take into consideration that we are using Zoom, Teams, or some other platforms for doing the remote calls, or even AI, webinars, newsletters, this is actually the tech which is here for a couple of years. So we are really not innovating anything in a very incremental way. We are just using the best out of the current state, and we will see, of course, how long this will stay with us. I think that today's biggest mission when we speak about the digital IQ or the content revolution is actually to detail and find out how to create a proper, fancy, and good-looking content. Because I think, in my personal opinion, the design and the beauty is actually all around us. So it's like nature. And for instance, we just take an example when we go for some fine dining or in some restaurant, etc. We first eat the food with our eyes. And it's the same with content, which means if you have some beautiful content, we can definitely differentiate our message and also our position in the eyes of our customers. So let's start with questions towards our panelists. The first question which we prepared today is a very interesting one, and this is content is key, and how pharma is aligned with that. So I would like to start with Davidek. Davidek, can you please share your opinion about that?
Thanks, Dario. And I think this is a really key question, right? Is content key, right? And is pharma aligned to it? With that said, I think we really need to look at some of the major trends we're currently seeing in the healthcare industry, and I'll focus on two in particular that align to this content conversation, right? One being the fact that obviously healthcare policymakers are really, and payers are increasingly mandating, really influencing doctors how they can prescribe. And then we're seeing this both in the US and also in Europe as well. And really it comes down to the pay for performance really is on the rise. So really the transition to value-based outcomes and focusing is really gathering more on real world evidence, right? And why I'm saying this is our content strategy from a marketeer perspective is really needs to align to this let's say this new model that's being shaped within healthcare. And now if you bolt onto that, the current situation in the last 4 to 6 months with COVID, right? We're seeing such an acceleration in this area, right? I mean, if you look at some of the numbers around just in January this year, right? We, on average, globally, from one platform, we saw maybe around in the low 20, 30,000, let's say, email communications to healthcare providers that were driven by reps. Where if you fast forward to August, we're seeing over 7.5 million. That is so much content we're now putting in front of our customers, where when it comes down to differentiation, really, as marketeers, we need to figure out how do we even go, beyond just the shiny content. How do we make sure we're providing kind of these value services? So with that said, Pharma has no choice but not to be aligned because the numbers are really backing that.
Thank you, Davidek. Malik, would you like to answer on the same question as well?
I was on mute. Yes, no, of course, that's indeed a great question and a great point, and that's something where I would say everybody was starting to be a little bit in panic mode beginning of February, where, oh crap, we need to create that much content for all the brands, where we were talking, among this group with our marketing team for the past years, and suddenly everything is becoming very urgent. And I would say that content is king in the sense where we want to create the best patient outcome. We want to create the best customer experience at the end of the day to make sure that we provide valuable information for our customers, and also at the end that we create the best brand loyalty as well to our product and also to the company where we work with. And in that sense, with the increased competition, is how are we more responsive, and how do we create more impact with every piece of content, as there is so much around that we need to make sure that we don't create this additional drop of water that will make the box too big for the doctors. And in that sense, how do we articulate all those content across channels, and how do we make it very impactful was indeed a very interesting job that we had to deal with in the past months.
Thank you, Malik. Morten, same question for you.
Yes, absolutely. So I certainly think when we look at content, it's key. It's also the key to earn the right to engage. And I think one of the challenges that we have as an industry is when we look at our traditional engagement model with a field rep. We take the rep out in the field. He visits his doctor. He makes sure that he's in front of the doctor delivering a message. When we then move into digital channels, that message delivery doesn't happen in the same proactive way. We can push messages, but by the end of the day, it is really the physician's right to pull the content they want. And acknowledging that as an industry that has a huge impact on how we create content is really something I think we need to be more aligned with. So when you ask, is content key and is Pharma aligned with it, I would say that we are conceptually aligned to the notion, but we are not delivering on it. So some examples is I see in my own organization that we have vast resources of research to inform our strategies, but yet we still tend to stick to the brand message, although everyone knows and to a large extent acknowledges that that the brand is not the place to start in building trusted digital relationships. But do we have the courage to start with the value to our customers and not to the value to us? And if that's the question, I would say we're probably not there yet. I think we still need to develop our marketeers to become more content strategists rather than, you could say, scientific geeks. And I mean that in the best possible way I can, because I'm not saying that science should be left aboard, but we need more people who can actually translate that science and the insights that we can gather from our content ecosystem and from our execution insights into new types of engaging content concepts. That's something I talk quite a lot about now, that we can create concepts that we can replicate fast as we go into the market instead of the old model where we produce these big digital assets or physical assets, that takes a long time to get into the market. And I think that's the second challenge we have. Do we have the agility to deliver content in a modern world? And is our industry and or ourselves actually holding us back? Because if it can take 40 days just to approve a promotional material, and now I look across the board here with some of my colleagues, they can probably recognize that this does not harmonize very well with the agility for an instant gratification that is needed in a true multi-channel world. So I think in very short, my answer is no, we're not aligned yet.
Okay, thank you. Morten, Mark, can we hear you?
I think you can hear me now, yes?
Great. Mark, would you like to give your opinion about that? You also prepared some slides, so I'm now sharing those slides on the screen.
Sure, that's fine. You can jump to the next slide. I think the gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, have certainly covered the baseline. You need to certainly start with that value-based content if you want to jump to the next slide. But really, the receptivity of the physician is tied to, is it relevant to their current personal situation, their practice, as well as the segmentation that's involved. The timing of that content, we've seen a huge volume of increase of materials that have been produced, but are your messages then being directly sent to the wastebasket, or are they actually being seen? So the speed and the agility that Morten just mentioned are absolutely key, but the reuse and adaptation and adaptability that Malik had mentioned are absolutely essential to ensure that there's a thread of that content right the way through and some level of measurability, so that what used to be an offline primarily focused world can now be transitioned to a digital world where we can do a lot more with the learnings, a lot more with the information about specific messages and how well received they are for very specific patients and physician groups, and then be able to then use that content to create new kind of venues. And if 80% of the work that we do can be done very easily and very quickly, and the machine can operate in an almost automated mode, then that additional 20% of effort can really be focused on the high value moments in the journey map that really make it possible for physicians to respond to our brand messages and understand who is the next best patient for the prescription.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Also, to our audience, we are taking questions as well. So if you would like to ask to our panelists any kind of questions, please feel free to do. We will, of course, collect the best questions and ask them later on. Next questions, of course, to all of you. The role of content value component, fluffy versus value driven. What's more important, to have a fluffy content, value driven, or can we have even a combination of both? We can maybe start this time with Malik. Malik?
Sorry. Yes. I would say you need a little bit of both. You know, in that sense. First thing first, I think one of the critical things we've worked with the marketing team and you know, with the whole organization in a cross-functional way is how do you create segmented messaging? How do you address segment of customers and not one size fits all? And if you do that, and if you are understanding the patient journey and the customer journey for each HCP, for those big segment of customers, you will avoid the pitfall of you know, sending something where the doctor will say, I'm not into that. And especially with all the product, with all the launches that we are having in Novartis, now we really need to be super crisp on the customer journey and the patient journey to make sure that we go into that level of details to understand which are the concept. At least if you are clear on the concept, then translating it into nicer content, you know, of course you need those you need a little bit of both. Some doctors are very, you know, science driven, and some others will be like everyone else, where if you see an attractive title, you will click on the email because it sounds cool, a bit like digital IQ. You want to know what it's about. And in that sense, I think we need a little bit of both. We need to do a little bit of A/B testing to make sure that we are having a little bit of everything for everyone. And Of course, for me, it's about creating the content, measuring the content, as Mark and Morten were explaining. I think it's one of the critical thing. And how do we change also the mindset with our marketeers? You know, all this journey that we need to take together to go into more agile marketing. You know, digital marketing on its sense must be agile, but in a fairly large organization like ours, this change management is taking a little bit longer. And so how do we go from here to be more customer driven and customer experience driven? I would say that that's one of the critical points. And for us, creating that content and making sure that it sticks also with customers is something where, of course, it's a journey, and we are in this journey. I'm not saying that we are there yet, but this how do we get the data, understand the data, and change the campaign will help us to avoid this fluffy aspect where we have some shiny content, but that is not really used by the field force, or also by our non-personal promotion tools. And in that sense, it's also a thin balance of understanding which content is working with all the data, and how do we enhance it a little bit better. And that's the part where, you know, the content creation piece, and how do we are more agile in the content creation and faster in the content creation, including MLR. Davidek, you're totally right. And I would say that's part also of the journey for me.
Thank you, Malik. Morten, let's start with you this time.
Yes. So to me, I maybe also want to ask a different question, because what do we actually mean by value? In the typical response that I get when I talk about what is the value of content, or we need to deliver valuable content, is okay, great, but what is the ROI of that specific asset that I create? And in the typical old model, we are always trying to look into a direct conversion to sales. But I think everyone who is working with digital marketing or sales in a model where you cannot create a direct conversion to a sales in an e-shop, that is simply not possible. So I also want to maybe shift the conversation into that the value here is engagement. And if we look at engagement as the currency that we always want to nurture, because we believe high engaging customers are more likely to prescribe, then absolutely value of content is hugely important. But as I said, it's not very easily interpreted. But I think as we start to go into our execution of customer journeys, for instance, and you said, Malik, about A/B testing, trying to understand what different types of content are executing and performing better from an engagement point of view. If that's the value we're looking at, then we can easily say that when we succeed delivering customer journeys to HCPs, we can drive 2 to 3 times higher engagement than we normally can when we have a thoughtful planning around what drives value for a specific segment. And that is not starting with the brand message. Because again, back to the point about driving digital trust, we need to start somewhere else. What is the starting point for our customer? That is rarely the brand, unless they are proactively reaching out for a specific question. But as I also said before, most of the time as a pharmaceutical company, we are the proactive part. We're pushing. So what earns the right for us to have that push content consumed? And we see when we do understand probably what drives engagement, not only what we see in all the research that we can buy from various firms, but also from our own analytics, we can drive that engagement 2 to 3 times higher than we normally can. And that can be anything around the brand and not the brand.
Thank you, Morten. Mark?
Taking that a step further, it's that consumption, that engagement is driven oftentimes by that the content itself, but also the user experience. So how easy is it for the physicians to actually access and consume the content, or even in the process, do they have the time to be able to make sense of the messages that they're receiving at that moment in time? So how easy is it for them to experience it? And at the end, are they delighted by that experience and they'd like to have it again, even though it was perhaps proactively sent to them by, as you're mentioning, Morten? But if it's happened well and it was a good experience, then they will accept to do it again and look for something similar. And it raises the bar of the kind of engagement that is acceptable and is desired by the physicians. And as we all have seen, when something is appropriately done, elegantly done, and delivered well as well as being critically evidence-based content, it has a much greater impact and it has a long-term impact on the physician's willingness to participate even further. And we think that that's a coming trend that perhaps we need to get out of our own way to ensure that we're not so worried about the deliverability and the execution of the content, but we're focusing on how do we deliver that next step experience so that the engagement is high enough, and then we can get the measurements that we need to drop the price down even lower.
Thank you, Mark. Davidek, Morten, you
Can I
have
add a comment? Because I completely agree with you, Mark, and it just it sparked another thought, because very often we talk about the impact of channels and for certain types of content, and we see over and over again surveys from HCP stating that they have a preference for X channel. They prefer to look for X content in maybe non-pharma locations, especially HCP websites from pharma. No, they're not trusted. Well, maybe that's fair enough because we are biased, but I think we can still do something about our content. But also that they simply don't look for any type of content on HCP websites. And have we ever thought about why they're not? Is it really only the bias component, or is it because we're not delivering any value and not making it easy for them to consume the content? Because we are not best practices in pharma when it comes to user experience. So I just want to say that, Mark, that when we as an industry start to evaluate what are we going to do in which channels, I think we should also reflect from the context we're coming from, and not just rule out an HCP website, for instance, from a pharmaceutical company, but maybe look inwards and think about how do we transform the experience that we're going to deliver to our customers. Because, sorry, I'm blunt here, but it has been and some things I cannot say in general from our industry, because we've been looking at creating guardrails for not consuming the content because we're so worried about the compliance part, and we're only thinking about the brand. But there are tons of ways where technology and maybe some creativity also nowadays could help us push that path.
Thank you, Morten.
Yeah,
David?
So Morten, let's actually dig a little deeper into that, because I actually want to talk about the channels, right? So at the end of the day, when it comes to content, right, clear message needs to be created once, right, and obviously distributed in the channel that it fits for the customer, right, whether a pharmacist or a healthcare provider. It all talks about our current workflow or their workflow. How do we disseminate, this content in that channel? In my previous role, I learned a lot about this, right, leading digital channels at Teva. But don't get me wrong, really come down to the way of the content behind that, all right? Because right now, a lot of companies, even brands, are focusing on the channel versus the content, right? Let's stand up these channels, have all these channels incorporated, but yet content or the message called is necessarily clear, right? You can see that in our history, right? Where we go from content back in 99 to 2000 was around, let's get as many reps out as possible. Let's put as much DTC out there, at least specifically in the US, and let's just start throwing content in reps. But now you see that shift where actually we're downgrading the sales force sizes. We're upgrading again the digital aspect, but then we're trying to incorporate all these various channels and not really putting a full strategy or channel journey, let's say, behind that. So the channel should become rather the means and not the end. So I agree with you, Morten, on that. I think that's really key. But it definitely comes down to a clear message that needs to be delivered once. And then as a marketeer, they need to understand what's the best workflow for that physician, pharmacist, whoever that customer at the end might be. So again, it's whether fluffy versus value driven, you still need, back to the original question, you do need some inspirational, emotional kind of content that will stick or be grabby, but it comes down to what's valuable for that customer. Because at the end of the day, our main objective, and even on this call, is to get medicines to patients in need. How we do that, there's many different ways we can support, let's say, that overall journey.
Thank you, Davidek. Very interesting. So maybe we should change the word value to experience, because we also see that actually CRM somehow also shifts to CX, so customer experience. So maybe this is the big next thing when we speak about content. Okay, next question. How you align with digital strategy versus content strategy, or is it the same? Maybe we can start this time with Morten. Morten?
Yes. I was actually pondering quite a lot about that question, Dario, because yes, of course, we do have, you could say, a digital strategy for platforms, what are we trying to achieve with our ecosystem on the digital side. But that being said, I think I came to the conclusion that no, we don't have a digital strategy because we have an engagement strategy with digital components. And I think that's the main point I want to get through here, is that the marketing, medical, market access, sales, well, we are here to find out how do we make sure that we engage our customers in the right way with the right content in the right channel at the right time. You know that one over and over again. But I think here it's very very important, because the component of digital is highly contextual for the relevance of it. Because sometimes we're very focused in the moment. Is the role of the sales rep dying? Is it only digital? Should we do one or the other? And at least where I'm heading is to better understand how does sales and marketing work in other types of B2B businesses, where you work seriously with customer experience, understanding more about the lead generation and stuff like that, and see what could be the future role of the rep in a physical context. That could be relationship building, for instance, something that we know we still have quite a big hurdles to overcome with digital channels driving that relationship building. But where can digital then complement? And back to the strategy part, I think that's where customer engagement planning, meaning having a well-defined strategy for a given brand or portfolio towards a specific customer segment, by translating the insights you have and combine that with your commercial and medical objectives. Translate that into a tangible customer journey across multiple channels and content components is basically, to me, what is the digital strategy, but as an engagement strategy. And I think probably that's the biggest mistake we can make, is to split them up. Because one, it doesn't become an embedded part of the business that we truly want to change. And secondly, does it really make sense?
Thank you, Morten. Mark, same question for you.
Yes, I agree with Morten. At the same time, I think on the digital side, as that component of the overall engagement strategy, we have to look at how do we move lockstep through various changes in our speed of execution and what that can mean. So as the platforms evolve, or as the data is made more available, and as our own content plans can become tactically more tied in and relevant to whether it be A/B testing or details that drive better engagement, you can use that baseline to further improve the level of that digital IQ or capability where you are. Is that speed of production? Is that speed of approval, speed of response to market events, speed of individual transactions, and how as part of a physician journey, and how they then are able to then get the information that they need to move on? Or is it the speed of the application of the learnings about the content components to that next cycle? So I think we have to make sure that we take this overall engagement strategy and that have that separate line for the digital strategy, because that is the place where we can tighten the engine, we can automate so much more, and we can move much more quickly to enable many more capabilities at a phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 4 as we move properly through this. The war is not won on the first day. It's really with this constant effort and making sure that we've got the measurements in place, good value content, and a good approach to user experience to increase that overall engagement. But if you can also tie in and tighten that speed on the digital side, it will certainly help drive that content strategy over time.
Thank you, Mark. Davidek?
Yeah, so again, really good question, right? And remember, I think we have to take a step back, understand really what is digital strategy. And I think if you ask even all of us on the call, we might have a little different interpretation of what is digital strategy, right? The when, the who, the where, how we engage with our customers, right? In order to meet our overall, their objectives and ours, as well as an organization. With that said, I mean, digital strategy, content strategy, it really comes down to understanding, what value can we provide to our customers. Organization, it's really marketing strategy, right? Nothing's really changed. It's just our outside and even outside of life sciences, our vertical, right? There's other industries that are really shaping how we communicate with our customers, forcing obviously the life sciences industries to really look more at opening up these other channels, right? So obviously a lot of our physicians are now dealing with their customers within the actually electronic health records, right? So I mean, how do we start incorporating different interactions in that manner to help be part of their workflow? Because if they're in front of that iPad for 6 or 8 hours a day, they might have a rep, which obviously is declining now. They might get a couple emails here and there. How do we really put that strategy on our needs? So that means it comes to the brand and more functionality, right? Really, how do you make us as an industry easy to work with, right? Whether it's purchasing products from us, so do we stand up potentially self-service e-commerce websites to make sure they can easily access information from us, whether it's billing, whether it's product information, things such as that, product recommendation, or whether it's a healthcare provider, how can they easily access quick information from us as an industry or through one of their aligned partners to make sure they get the right medicines to patients. So nothing's really changed. If you even go back 20, 15 years ago, the marketing strategy is always similar. It's just the fact that now we're doing these digital, let's say, interactions with our customers that really need to put it together. So overall, I mean, it's really interesting, and I think there's still a lot for us to learn. And as a specific use case, I mean, we're starting to see some companies do it well and some companies not.
Thank you, Davidek. Malik?
I would say to me, it starts with the intent. What is the intent of what we're trying to do? And for me, clearly, it's how do we drive superior patient outcome? How do we make sure that the right patient is getting the right drug? And that you truly believe that what you do would be beneficial for the patient. And in that sense, then you need to think about the patient journey and then the HCP journey in that sense, why do you need to convince him and when do you need to convince him? What is the micro moment where he would think, okay, why would I prefer this drug compared to this one? Of course, when you are in the case of a Me Too, it might be a little bit different, but every drug is a little bit different. And how do you drive that? And if you're clear on why you're doing things, and then what is the marketing strategy? What is the engagement plan? What is the customer journey? What is the patient journey? Then, of course, you will need to think about your data strategy. How am I reaching that? And what do I measure? And you were talking before, marketing about a digital strategy. I would say there is an omnichannel. Of course, we are still in the multi-channel path, but how do we drive omnichannel and how do we drive the omnichannel strategy? And as both Morten and Davidek was saying, it's also how do we coordinate both digital and in-person engagement. And this is quite key, and that's why the content plus the data is key in that engagement. Once you're clear on the messaging, is how do you coordinate on that to drive your intent? And for me, it starts also with that, and of course everything then will follow. And of course you need to have a clear understanding of the infrastructure as well. That's a key piece in the business. It's not only about the content now, it's also about the infrastructure that will help you to be better with the content engagement, and how do you fine-tune then the content based on that. And with everything that is changing, and the content creation is quite disrupt now. We are able with tools to do more. It's also how do you optimize this content? How do you create content recommendation based on that for specific segment of customers? And then how do you create content? That's the goal where we are getting also, it's the content personalization. And in that sense, that's then everything else will follow in this content personalization piece. So for me, it starts with the intent, and then you have the overall marketing strategy, and then the rest will follow for me.
Malik, can I add one more thing to that real quick? And I think you hit it on the nail in regards to data strategy, right? All this is really driven by the data in the back end, whether it's how you tag your content, whether it's how you measure how your customers are interacting with the content, whether it's on web, whether it's with your reps, etc., right? And then that data should then align and really drive the ramping up or ramping down of certain type of messages with your customers. But I mean, you nailed it, right? It really comes down to the data, and that's what we're seeing in the industry is that back end, right? The foundational, which a lot of people don't really want to talk about, but that's something that I are seeing companies are starting to focus more on. We have to, the foundation, before we can even create these holistic, inspirational, great customer journeys, right? If you don't have that back end set up, what I mean by, one place where you store your content, right? One place where your data is being stored, consents, etc. You're not able to achieve that up front unless you're then going to have very siloed approaches. So you hit it on the nail there.
Okay. Morten, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, it was along those lines because after Mark made his comments around this, of course there is a digital strategy behind the components supporting the engagement planning. And for us, there are three major buckets of technology and process, you could say. There is our executional ecosystem for MCE, there is the analytics for MCE, but then there is also the digital content supply chain, fully integrated from digital asset management to content production to approval to sharing in execution. And if we look at the strategy behind that, what are the things that we are interested in order to support an engagement plan that includes a lot of digital channels? Well, it is use, it is reuse, and it is to a large extent also how much time does it take to bring an asset from end to end in the content supply chain. And I could speak about this for hours because this is something I'm very keen on also in our company. But there are so many places where you can tweak the process, either by insourcing the process because you actually see that you are more efficient doing it yourself with a specialist competence. It could be by mandating certain processes, but it could also be by automating. And I think it's, especially in the automation part, there's a lot coming both on the platform side using AI to both simplify and speed up the MLR process. That are really interesting things coming out in that space. But there are maybe also some things looking inside. So as a part of the agility and talking about content strategy versus engagement plans, there's no way around that. We also need to look at our medical, legal, regulatory processes and the simplification around that if we want to survive from an engagement point of view as an industry. That needs to be dealt with. And what we've done in Novo Nordisk is, as a part of enabling the entire content supply chain, we have also enabled modular content, fully integrated with Vault and PromoMats, which helps us in the approval process now to pull content much faster through because we have historical data on both approval and performance of that piece of content. So it helps us make much more qualified decisions, both in the medical, legal, regulatory process, but also in the process early on around should we even produce this content at all. So just as a remark to you, Ben, that or Mark, sorry, that of course that is happening in the background, and there's a lot of thought going into that.
Mark, would you like
just to your point, and fully align, Morten, and especially now that we have the kind of the Amazon gold standard where everything is now and everything is in the moment. You cannot wait like 4 weeks, 2 months to deliver a piece of content just after a congress. My vision that is not executed yet would be how do we create and deploy content in 24 hours. And for that, I agree, MLR is critical, all the change management is critical, and all the infrastructure behind, as you were saying, is also critical. And we are in the journey of that. But if we really want to be true with ourselves to drive this customer engagement, that's where we need to go. And that's super challenging indeed.
Yeah, and can I say one more thing on this subject, right? And again, I'm not sure if I agree that speed to market. Obviously, we're getting better as an industry of getting content out from, let's say, event highlights, next day, et cetera. But I think what I'm seeing is even outside of our company, there is still a lot of content there. But I think there's a bad organization of it, storage of it, even reuse of it, right? So I think how can we really best leverage the content we have, whether it's a regional asset or global asset, even across borders, right? We still see these silos in a lot of these companies, right? So obviously I agree, but I'm not sure if speeding up that process is really going to solve it. Obviously in certain situations, that'll just give us more content faster. But then once we have it, we're going to have even more data storage, these pieces sitting everywhere. And I'm not sure necessarily we're going to be able to leverage that to the best of its need, versus maybe we leverage that money or spend our time elsewhere, right? On the patient side, I don't know, right? That's a whole nother conversation, but
hopefully there's also an efficiency component in that content delivery process. I hear what you're saying, but I also do think that by easing up this process, you also drive down some of the barriers for more multi-channel. We, at least from where I sit, it's a major barrier that you don't have either the money or certainly not the time to drive down these assets. So we need to simplify that process, and then hopefully, because I agree, the goal is not to produce much more content, but producing the right content. But by producing more and executing, we hopefully also deliver more insights back to the process to help inform us. Because I'm not sure in the level where we are today, as general as an organization, that we actually have enough insights from execution to really become knowledgeable about the next best.
Gentlemen, we received, of course, thank you for the insights. We received a lot of questions. I will pick one, but I also would like to mention that we arranged a virtual community platform where everyone who registered can also communicate later on, also after this session, to ask the questions to speakers, etc., and to have a proactive discussion. But let's take one interesting question. So I picked, how do you do A/B testing for content? I mean, it's obvious, a very simple question, right? A/B is something what is here, I would say, maybe for even 20 or 30 years or even more. But how do you in particular do that? Please keep it short as possible.
So I'll answer that real quick on my end. So leading the platforms globally, it's almost you have to put a governance behind it, right? Certain campaigns that go through these systems that we have ownership of need to have some aspect of A/B testing, almost as a check the box, right? And as you continue to, let's say, run your marketeers through this process, they'll become more confident and comfortable with that. And again, it comes back to the data in the back end, right? Sometimes when you run A/B testing, it means they find out that, hey, my data wasn't structured the way it should have been. So then that's the reason why we're seeing a lot of resistance in this space.
Davidek, anyone else would like to answer on that?
I think from an A/B approach, a lot of it is how quickly can you execute, and can you be able to automate some of that process. And if you look at what other industries do, for example, Waze on a travel site, sometimes you're the guinea pig that is being selected to go down a different road. How can Waze present the best options if they don't send some people down the wrong road? You need to be able to do that in order to gather data back and make use of it. So an A/B testing strategy needs to be tied to the content strategy, since is it just for an item that you're testing, or is it also for a branch of the journey over a period of time that you'll be using for testing that A/B approach?
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else, or can we continue to the next question?
Just very quick.
I would say it's also a matter of tools. It's easier to do it with automated system, and I have in mind Marketing Cloud from Salesforce.com, where it's fairly easy to create this by design. With the field force, it's possible, to use the field force. It's just a little bit more difficult, and you will need to dig in the data a little bit more. And so, if you want to try something, I would say those non-personal promotion tools are a little bit easier to handle if you want to get first-hand experience on your side.
Malik, Morten?
Yeah, I also just wanted to very concretely, we use Salesforce Marketing Cloud as well for A/B testing. On top of that, Adobe Target. There are probably many other types of solutions for websites, but to simply replace content A/B test, but also target fairly simple type of segments, these platforms are very good for that. I still think if I also have, so that's a great opportunity, and we learn a lot from it in our execution. But the challenge is still also again back to the medical, legal, regulatory process, and why that needs to change, because very often our people in these functions will ask us to show us all the possible combinations for approval, because they need contextual approval. So it's just something to bear in mind, because we're also talking a lot about how can we start to personalize the experience much more on our digital destinations, and this comes up as a barrier all the time, and we have some concrete steps we're working on to do that, but just to say that it's not as straightforward as we were hoping to sometimes. But I also don't want to get your hopes down, because it can happen. Just fight for it in your organization.
Yeah, and guys, just to close off on this real quick, Darius, I mean, the call to action here is literally just identify a brand or segment or region that you feel you have the data to run this in, and literally just do it. highlight that case, and then expand and put governance behind it, right? So it's not complicated. It's just the fact of taking those baby steps to start it, show the value of why you need to do it organizationally, internally, and then just execute.
Thank you. Let's move forward to the next question. Who is responsible for the whole content ecosystem? So maybe we can start this time with Mark.
Who's responsible for the whole content ecosystem? Well, at the end of the day, from our perspective, there is the brand manager is trying to provide the right information with all of these various systems and supports across the board to physicians so that they can better respond to the next patient that comes into their office. Essentially, that crux of that information has to come together with that brand manager to provide that leadership across their various channels and their various initiatives that they would like to operate. Then, as you look outside, whether in different markets, whether going regionally or into different tactics or technologies, they need to be able to consume all of that information on how to deliver that best engagement. And certainly, it's something where they end up being the quarterback of an overall team that is quickly evolving, and they need to take advantage of not just the field force that is there and evolving, but also the digital channels, the measurement that are also evolving along the way. But ultimately, that brand manager high up in the food chain needs to make those decisions in order to provide lockstep and evolution for the content going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Davidek?
Yeah, no, I agree with Mark on that, right? 100%. It really comes down to the marketeer that owns that, and then there's obviously some key players in regards to digital asset management, publishing of the content in the specific channels, tagging of it, etc. Right? But it really comes down to the marketeer understanding and owning the overall objective or strategic objective for the brand itself.
Thank you. Morten?
Yes, I agree that it is the marketeers or medical or whoever is driving that engagement who is responsible. But I do also want to advocate for a strong, centralized content supply chain in the company, because as actually you're saying, Davidek, we want to generate insights from this, and we want to drive efficiencies. And at least from my experience, if you're not driving the centralized model, you see a lot of charges from agencies that are done for work that may not happen, or it's overcharged. And on the same time, we see that the tagging is not happening. And if we want to reinforce our meta tagging, we want to reinforce our insights generation, at least what we have done is that we have centralized everything from digital asset management to digital content production to the approval workflows and mandating those approval workflows all the way to execution centrally. So we're taking that work in from the agencies and manage it ourselves, because we believe that's the right way to both have the right hygiene in our digital asset management system, but also making sure that we have the right hygiene all the way through when new assets are created.
Malik?
Great question. I would say, to rephrase it a little bit, you need first a strong business need. Whoever is driving that, medical, commercial, and that could be very distinct in some countries. You need a strong business need first, and after that, you also need great translators. And I think you have three of them here. Someone who is able to talk to business, who is able to talk to commercial IT, who is able to talk to the infrastructure people, to the data people, to then translate this need into clear tactics afterwards. And that could be quite big investment indeed. And then there is a big cross-functional work to be done, because at one point, my vision is also how do we empower the local markets, because at the end, they are the customers of what we do, to make sure that they can use whatever we produce in terms of content and tactics and infrastructure, and make sure that they are able to have a simple way of working in a very cross-functional way with commercial IT, agencies, the field force. And that local empowerment requires also different tools and also in the content creation. I would say, how do we let them create content in an easy or localized content in an easy manner, but still structured to make sure that we benefit all from the great tools, AI, advanced analytics, content recommendation, content personalization, and all that. For me, it's a great functional work that we should do, and we play a role as a translators of this vision.
Thank you, Malik. And last but not least question, the next big thing in content. Let's outlook for the future. Maybe this time we can start with David.
Yes, that's interesting. When I thought about that question, right? The next big thing in content, obviously, you know, when you deal with method of action or mode of action for certain drugs, obviously there's going to be a need for, let's say, VR, augmented reality, things such as that. But again, living in the Netherlands, I'll be very blunt now. I mean, a lot of that still is fluffy digital. And I think really it might not be necessarily a good use of our funds and a good use of the way we communicate with our customers. The next big thing really is this understanding how do we really tag our content? How do we reuse content? How do we truly understand what's valuable for our customers, right? Whether it's the patients, whether it's the healthcare providers, whether it's the pharmacists. How can we make sure we provide valuable services in content? And content meaning maybe it's not a nice looking cat on a email, but it's, hey, I get this information in the right time when they need it, right, on their mobile. So it's really comes down to how can we best serve our customers, because just to be transparent, all of us work for different companies. We all have great strategy in place, and we're going to increase the content we have potentially. We're going to increase the channel usage or optimize that. It's going to be very noisy. It's already very noisy for our customers, and they're going to start turning people off and on. And we need to figure out how do you truly differentiate. And more importantly, I think the big thing in content is collaboration across industry, right? To be very transparent, right? I think there's going to be more collaboration as differentiation is going to be small, but we might take a step back and say, how can we best serve our patients as an industry? Versus I want to take part of your market share versus I'll take my market share. So the next big thing in content, I think, is collaboration and really understanding the data behind it.
Malik?
So for me, it's I was talking about this Amazon gold standard about customer experience, and of course, fully aligned, Davidek. It's a very good point, the collaboration piece, to avoid this overflow effect. Was how do we go into that customer experience? And in Amazon, they tend to say that they are flexible on the application of the strategy, but the vision needs to be intangible. It has to stay the same. And if you're clear on that, it means that whatever the channel, and for me, some of the channels might change. For now, we are using a lot of emails. Maybe WhatsApp in some markets makes more sense still in a very ethical way, not to bombard them, but still because that's the proper channel. In China, we use WeChat. There is good work with Alibaba as well. One that could be interesting as well is the voice marketing, using the Amazon skills. That might be something in the future once those tools are getting more spread. And I would say there is this content personalization piece that is very close to my heart, but requires as well the modular content, the true modular content that we are only starting to scratch for now in Novartis. And those are the key things that are quite exciting in the coming years, I would say.
Thank you. Morten?
So I think I'm fully aligned with Davidek that data is important. There is, of course, the obvious one, AI, both in terms of content relevance, but also in sampling of content and approval of content. And I think there are some good examples already in the area of approval. But I also want to highlight that I actually think this is sci-fi without the right data foundation in place and the agility in our organizations. So before we start to talk about the next big thing in content, I think we need to prepare for the next big thing, and that is really our data foundation.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, taking on that tack, it's the automation of that supply chain. So Morten had mentioned previously that content supply chain, being able to have that proper foundation, be able to automate it properly, being able to spend much less time on the basics. There's 80% that need to get done and be able to apply new tactics or new elements to new experiences, new engagements that will drive that conversation further without sacrificing data. And we think that in terms of that user experience, that the whole aspect of personalized video, the kinds of virtualization of physicians' experiences that they may be having today, but perhaps they're going to have slightly derivative versions in the future, where they can have a much better engagement experience and still not sacrifice data and have the right value content come through, that those will end up being the next big thing when we start looking in hindsight a couple of years down the road.
Thank you very much. I said we received a lot of questions. We will copy them into the virtual community group so that everyone can also reply on them later on. However, I have a question which just came up to my mind, and this is what are the critical KPIs when we speak about the content success? I think that this is, still something what we need to figure out, but really keen to hear from your experts. So what are the critical KPIs? Morten?
By the end of the day, isn't it? So back to what I talked about earlier. If engagement is our currency,
Okay.
and we cannot correlate directly to sales, the depth of engagement the content actually drove. And I know this is a really difficult exercise to try and follow the content from the original creation, localization, all the way to execution. But to me, that is the critical path. But there's a lot of things that we can look at on the way, and that is back to Mark's points. Around can we at least ease the complexity and the time and the effort it takes to bring content to market. But I really want to see the depth of engagement it drove for certain types of coverage that I have in the marketplace across digital and face-to-face in a blended model.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add to that real quick as well, Morten. I agree, engagement's key, but I mean, strategically, from even a paid perspective, you can get a lot of engagement, right? But it really comes down to the call to action. But then making sure that content drive that call to action, right, is the marketing mix that we really still haven't figured out yet. So I'm aligned to that.
Mark, Malik?
For me, it's the critical idea is the customer journey, and are you able to break it down into smaller pieces that you're able to measure? And in that sense, the goal also of the advanced analytics, are you able to correlate the moment where you went from let's say a loyalist from your competitor to trying your brand and trying your product? That's one of the moments where you would like to, of course it will be with multiple factors, but are you able to track those micro moments? And are you able to convert that? Because beyond the simple KPI, opening rate, click-through rate, blah, 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 it's also, are you able to engage with customers, and are you able to change his mindset to try something else? And that's the point where we are trying to do correlations and causations.
Mark?
Yeah, and from that engagement index or that KPI that's measured, also that notion of reuse or agility or adaptability of that original content item that was produced, and how is that tree structure? How does it flow into multiple different uses across multiple different channels? And then at the end of the day, what is that cost per use of that particular content item? Being able to measure not just the engagement with a particular channel or piece of content, but how does it flow from the beginning to all of its various derivative or localized versions, so that you can actually reduce over time the costs for that level of engagement, and again start addressing those additional budget items and put them on new things, new ways to lift the head above the crowd and all of those millions of messages that are out there, because everybody across the industry is trying to do the same thing, and they need to still need to be able to achieve that baseline and still be differentiated.
Thank you all. It was really a pleasure. We are coming to the end of our first session out of the 10 which we planned for this week. Was very proactive, very interesting. Once again, we will copy the questions which we received to the virtual community. Hope you can also join there and maybe give some answers as well. Looking forward to the remaining 9 sessions. Once again, thank you very much for the support. It was really a lot of fun. And of course, the video will be also published on our official YouTube channel. Gentlemen, thank you. Wish you a nice and productive rest of the day. And take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.